Hello, welcome to the third part of our look at the world of Saga, which will be being used in our forthcoming campaign, the World of Saga 3 Asunder. This is mainly to help, as I said before, people come up with characters, as we have a full party now, and maybe even help our NPCs come up with characters, because we have a few people playing NPCs this time around. So this time, I wanted to look at the central continent, which would be Kaledanian. It's really not a continent on its own, it's more of a peninsula, offshooting from a continent. This is a general picture that I found, which essentially gives you a good overview of what the landscape looks like in Kaledanian. Ignore the woman on the left, I have no idea what she's doing. She's just, chilling with the birds, it seems. Hopefully you'll notice the music's changed. That's because I think this is a piece of music that really does sum up what Kaledanian's all about. It's essentially, for looking at Saga, is a world which is based on historical fact with some fancy flavourings. Kaledanian is what would have happened to Europe, medieval Europe, if the Romans never conquered it. Like if Julius Caesar never came north and basically conquered most of France and made sure the Romans could get to Britain. That's why in modern day Europe there's such a disconnect, like you have in language. So you've got English and French and even Spanish all have their languages are very Latinized. They're very, they are very Latin. They all come from the same sort of genus. Whereas Germany, which was never conquered by the Romans, is completely different. The language is completely different. Certain parts of Germany were conquered by the Romans, but the main heartland, Denmark, south of Denmark, Hamburg, Berlin, all of that area, Bavaria, not conquered by the Romans. They never really went across the Rhine River. And Kaledanian is essentially what would have happened if the Romans never came north. What would have happened? Because even though it is the most quintessential fantasy kingdom in medieval kingdom in Saga, when the Valenrethian Empire came to Kaledanian, they didn't manage to wipe out and replace the culture of Kaledania. It remained of Kaledanian. It still remained a very tribal, clan-based society. But now it's a lot more organised. The one thing the Valenrethian Empire did give to Kaledanian when it invaded it and eventually took it over is they gave them organisation. They gave them the means, the technology to make castles and to make huge cities, and they did so. Well, first thing I wanted to show you was a map, because I said I'd get you a map, so here we are. You'll have to forgive it, it's not a very good map, it's just one I took about half an hour drawing. And here you can see on the left hand side, this is what I was talking about yesterday, it's the... on the left hand side you've got... Well, you can see that the three continents here. Valenrethian and Kaledanian are all attached to this big continent at the top. Okay, that's one continent. It goes all the way across to the northeast there, to the Sunderlands, and then though on the far right here, where it says Gensen and Menshai in dark green, that is actually a continent, an island continent on its own. The east, it stretches far and away to the right, and the more astute of you would be saying, well, hang on a second, didn't you say that the further south you go, the colder it gets, and the further north you go, the hotter it gets? And you said Menshai was hot in the last part. Why is Menshai a bit further south? Well, that's because this is a globe, obviously, and the eastern continent actually bends around, so it actually goes further north. It goes further north the more you bend around. What we're seeing here is the most southern tip of it. So obviously you've got the mist continent is there on the right. The lost continent is on the bottom, which we will come to in later videos. Valenreath was covered yesterday, which is on the left hand side here, and you can see it's the shape of basically Iberia, where Spain is today. You know, it's the same shape, but many, 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 many times the size. As in, Spain can fit into where you can see the word W, you know, on the word Valenreith, where the E, the R, the E, the A, the T, and the H are. That circle in there that's enclosed by mountains, that's the size of Spain. So, you know, Valenreith is pretty massive. That's what we covered yesterday. And you can see Dead Valen there on the southern coast. And you can see Velrod on the left-hand side as well. And Solothurn, which is the new city. The new capital city of the Empire, Solothurn. So, you've got the breaking seas there, which is what the First Empire crossed to conquer Kaledanian back in the day. And you've got Kaledanian there, and it actually... I've actually spelt Morvaid wrong. My god, it's my setting and I've spelt Morvaid wrong. That's because I live in a town called Morton. Moreton, and I was filling in forms around about the same time that I was making this map. So Morvaid shouldn't have an E in it, it should just be Morvaid. But Kaledanian, yeah. So Valenreith is the amalgamation of the Roman, Persian, and Greek empires into one monolithic culture over there. But Kaledanian essentially held on to its rights, even though it was conquered by the Valenreithian Empire. And if you can imagine on that map, Valenreith, Sarpedon basically was part of the armies that took over Kaledanian, and then he led all of Valenreith to go to the east and conquer that entire continent over there. So they have essentially held the entire of the central green band of the world in between the two extremes of the binding wastes, the deserts at the top, and the lost continent and the snows of the south. All of the equator lands, all of the habitable lands of Saga, they basically held. So, Kaledanian, as you can see there, is the central peninsula of Saga, and it is basically medieval Europe with more Celtic fashions than Latin ones. So, back in the day before Valenreith took over Kaledanian, it was ruled by old clans, or Kalmatar, as they were called in the language of Kaledanian. And these old clans, they didn't roam, they weren't nomadic clans, they stayed in the same areas. And they basically had their own customs, their own ways of life. For instance, the blood rite is a custom of Kaledanian, and that is whenever the chief of the clan is declared dead, his heir, his chosen heir, comes to the blood rite, and the blood rite is basically he asserts his right to rule, or she, because women can rule in Kaledanian. He asserts his right to rule by basically saying he's the ruler, and any of the nobles there, anybody in the clan, can step forward and try to take it from him, basically in a trial of combat to the death. There is a thing called the ruler's advantage in the blood rite, and that is that the ruler can actually elect a champion to fight on his behalf, whereas the person attempting to wrest control away from the ruler cannot. So if you want to become chief of the clan, you have to fight the fight to the death yourself, and you can't hide behind anyone, whereas the actual person who is doing the defending can. Because sometimes, you know, a chief will die and his son or daughter will only be 2 or 3 years old, so obviously they can't fight, so then, you know, that's why it's called the ruler's advantage. Nowadays it's called the Kael's advantage, even though no one has ever tried to claim power through blood right. It's really weird, like, not since the earliest of the great clans, of the old clans, since they've been actual kingdoms, or Kaeldoms as they're called in this world, no one's really attested their rule in such a way, even though the law is actually there, and it actually is a law, and counts. So, they, as I said, they had their own customs. It was a mainly tribal society. So you've got to think along the lines of the Picts, the Gauls. So this isn't, just because I say it's tribal, this doesn't mean it's backwards. They were incredibly advanced. They had fantastic irrigation works. They had really amazing trading lanes to each other, and there was mainly peace. There was war at times, but mainly peace on Kaledanian, until the First Empire eventually came, as we covered yesterday. The First Empire, the Valenrethian Empire, crossed and came into Kaledanian and fought a war of conquest to eventually bring the Kales to heel. Now, we have this new province was actually ruled from Morvaid, which is in the top right there, and they still to this day, Morvaid holds the old imperial ties closest to its heart, and the Kales of Morvaid, they hold an imperial lust after the rest of Kaledanian, simply because they say they were in charge of the province, so they should, now that they're free of the First Empire, they should basically hold sway over all of Kaledanian. But obviously the other Kale ships disagree, and that's led to some wars over the ages, and indeed there is a war going on right now in lore, in the present day, which involves Morvaid, but we'll get to that a bit later on. So, I think we should pick up the story when the Valenrethian Empire has fallen. Okay, so this is after the Battle of Vigil Vale that I discussed yesterday, when Saga basically expelled the First Empire from Kaledanian. But she died of her wounds, unfortunately, and she was going to be the elected queen of Kaledanian, of a united Kaledanian. Those plans tragically fell through when she died without an heir. And so what then happened was a time called the 11-year birth, where the four main families of Kaledanian went to war to see who was going to claim Serencaea's, essentially her birthright, to rule Kaledanian. And this was an 11-year war. That's why it's called the 11-year birth. And at the end of this war, the Age of Valen ends, and the Shattered Age begins. So the war carries on for 11 years until the first cleric of the Spire Church, which is now in exile, which has been exiled from Valenreath, as we covered yesterday, comes across the breaking seas and establishes new ties in Kaledanian. Now, most people at this stage in Kaledanian are worshipping the Spire Church, and so the Spire Church, as I said yesterday, they agree to give legitimacy to those who want to rule in Kaledanian. They say, okay, we will draw up borders, and you will each have a Kaledom, not a kingdom. That's not what it's called. The name for a king in the language of Kaledanian is Kale. Whereas the name for dragon in Valenreath is also Kale, so you can take whichever one you want. So the Spire Church at the on the mountains by the mountains of Creed, which is the left of the central mountains you see there on the map of Kaledanian, they bring everyone together and they say, okay, we're going to sign a treaty, and they sign into being the four Kaledoms, the four great Kaledoms that you see there, and they essentially sign into being the Sentinels. And the Sentinels are a sect of knights who are chiefly made to hunt down binding users, because at the signing of the Silken Bandage, where the four Kaledoms are signed into being, the binding is outlawed. So the very power that gives Kaledanian its mythical edge, the very power that makes Kaledanian different from everywhere else in the world, well, the ruling families of Kaledanian essentially trade that away so they can have the kingdoms of their own, Kaledoms of their own. And eventually, the dragons die out, they disappear, all of the mythical creatures of Kaledanian, because this is the place where you would find giants, this is the place where you would find some of the more magical fantasy creatures, they all die off. And some of the biggest ones to die off are actually the guardian beasts. Now, the guardian beasts is a religion of the guardians, which is an ancient old clan religion of Kaledanian, where they basically worship the four most powerful creatures that they know of, because the old clans had a special tie to the binding, just as the guardian beasts did. Now, the guardian beasts were the dragon, who ruled the sky, the leviathan, who ruled the seas, the diamane, who ruled the plains, and the white stag, who ruled the forests. So these are basically gargantuan creatures, huge creatures. They're not the only ones, of course, so there's not just one massive dragon who's called the guardian beast. No, there's actually several grand dragons who are 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times the size of any dragon you've ever come across in any piece of literature, because they are essentially gods. There's the Leviathan, who is a massive sea dragon, sea serpent, basically. There's a few of them, so there's not just the one Leviathan. There's a few of them. White stags. There's a few white stags, which are essentially huge white stags, and there are diamanes, which are lions, which are again 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times the size of an actual lion that we have on Earth today. They were all empowered by the binding, and when the Spire Church came and outlawed the binding because they felt that it was to blame for the fall of Valen in the west, those creatures gradually ebbed away. And they were already ebbing away because people weren't believing in them as much. They weren't getting behind them as much because the Spire Church had already come to Kaledanian with the First Empire and started converting people. And the more people believed in the Spire Church's dogma, which always disapproved of the binding, by the way, the less power the binding had on Kaledanian. And so the guardian creature, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. The guardian beasts ebb away as the power of the binding ebbs away because there is a new religion there, and so when the guardian beasts ebb away and start disappearing, people stop believing in them as much, they stop using the binding as much, and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So today, essentially, the guardian beasts are a dead religion. Sorry, having a drink. So essentially, yeah, the guardian beasts are a dead religion today. They're no longer around, they're no longer do anything. Dragons have just started to come back into the world, along with many other different beasts in Kaledanian. Now, this isn't a big prophecy sort of thing, the magic isn't going to come back, they're not. No, it's just the fact that in modern day Kaledanian, the Spire Church is losing power in modern day Kaledanian. After centuries and centuries of having complete dominance, it's become quite corrupt, and it's not the conscience of the masses that it should be, and the people of Kaledanian know that, and a lot of them are starting to turn back to the guardian beast. A lot of them are starting to wonder where they went, and so that religion is making a mini comeback. And so instead of having 7 dragons, grand dragons, you now have 1 or 2, about. And just because there are only 7 or 1 or 2 grand dragons doesn't mean there are no other dragons. There are. They're just a lot smaller. They're like the size of the normal fantasy dragon, basically. So that's the religion of Kaledanian. So we'll show you some other pictures now. So I think we'll go into the Kaledums as they are. So at the signing of the Silken Bandage, which was in, let's see, the Silken Bandage was signed in doesn't actually say. It should do. It will be here somewhere. I think it's the year 2000. I'm pretty sure it's the year 2000 because, yeah, it is, because the 11-year birth starts in 1989. That's 11 years. So in the year 2000, the Shattered Age starts, and the Spire Church names it the Shattered Age because there are shattered pieces of the First Empire all over the place in the modern world. So they call it the Shattered Age. And on the signing of the Silken Bandage, which ends the War of the 11-Year Birth, 4 Kael'doms are signed into being. First of which that we'll cover is probably Morvaid, because it's got the most to do with the First Empire. The Kaeldom of Morvaid is essentially the Kaeldom that has most of the links. Sorry, let me just change this now. Has most of the links to the old Empire, the First Empire. So it is a classical fantasy medieval kingdom. Its colours are crimson, and it sports the golden eagle. That is its main motif, is the golden eagle, or the golden falcon. The falcon and the eagle hold special places of respect in both the First Empire, as it was, the Valenrethian Empire now, and Morvaid. Morvaid sees the rest of the Kael'doms as their right, because they were the original stewards of the province, were the Vanes. That was their name, Vane. The Vanes were the original stewards of the land, left in charge of Kaledanian by the First Empire. Now, when the First Empire fell, obviously they were one of the people who rose up. But yeah, the Vanes ruled Morvaid, which was signed into being at the Silken Bandage, and they have the most verdant lands, the most prosperous lands in Kaledanian. They're one of the most northernmost Kael'doms. They have massive irrigation parks. They have sunshine nearly all year round. They have verdant rainy seasons as well. So there is basically, as I said yesterday, it's a crucible of growth in Morvaid. It has the best of everything. It even has extensive gold and gem mines and silver mines. It is the richest Kaeldom. I keep trying to say kingdom, even though it's not. It has the richest Kaeldom in Kaledanian. And as such, it has the most populous, it has the most people living in it, and it has the greatest armies. The only thing that's keeping Morvaid in check, really, is the fact that they fear that if they attack one of their neighbours, then they will band all of the neighbours against them, and they could lose the great gains that they've made in having the most prosperous lands available to them. It hasn't all been sunshine and rainbows for Morvaid, though. Because... Whoops. Yeah, in the... Oh... Yeah. In the 2599th year of the Shattered Age, this is quite recent, actually. It's not that long ago. The Great Kaeldom of Morvaid existed relatively peacefully after signing the Silken Bandage, so for quite a few years. The Vane family ruled with assurance that theirs was a lineage that would never be challenged. Their bloodline failed, however, when Kerathin Vane, the second female Kael of Morvaid, died in childbirth, and her husband, Lord Oberon Vexland, lobbied that he be given control of the state. The Vanes were no more, essentially. The Vanes, like many major houses in Kaledanian, however, have cadet branches, smaller branches, bastard offshoots of their central line that are permanent allies. The chief of these branches to the Vanes was a family known as the Cal Vanes, literally meaning landed veins in the Kaledanian tongue. And in the 2599th year of the Shattered Age, as I just discussed, the leader of this cadet branch, Balian Calvane, lobbied the allies of the Vanes against what he painted as a usurper and an opportunist in Oberon Vexland, and declared himself the new Kael of Morvaid. For the next 15 years, the realm of Morvaid was divided almost down the middle of its territory as the Vexlands and the Calvanes fought over the throne. This remains the only civil war in Kaledanian history, and for over a decade, blood was spilled throughout Morvaid in a conflict that split families apart. For all the political manoeuvring and grandstanding of the time, the war was deadlocked, with both sides hammering at each other. Even an intervention from the Spire Church could not set them aside. So that shows you the decline in power of the Spire Church. Really, it started to ebb away because they can't even. They used to be able to just stop everybody fighting, like everybody fighting in Kaledanian. Now they can't stop one Kaledom from fighting itself. That just shows you the erosion of power of the church at this time. So. In the 2606th year of the Shattered Age, so this would be 7 years into the conflict, Balian Calvain made a pilgrimage up the mountains of Creed to speak with the High Cleric of the Spire Church, the Lord of Rags, Liomedion the Fourth. I know, great names. Hard for me to say as well. The mountains of Creed is this central row of peaks that you see here. They will be on the left-hand side. Okay. What transpired between the two remains unknown, but what is known is that the Spire Church declared its support for Balian Calvain and his claim in the months after this meeting. Also, Spire Church efforts within Calvain lands were unrestricted, whilst there was a holy tax introduced to raise money for church construction efforts. With the support of the Spire Church, Balian began turning the tide of the war, and by the 2614th year of the Shattered Age, he marched his army into the field before Morvaid city itself to challenge Oberon to a final confrontation. Oberon accepted and made his way to the field, but stopped to rest his men at a fortress known as Laeren's Peak. There he was dined by his lords and talked strategy long into the night. Unknown to Oberon, however, was that half of his lords had already switched sides to the Calvain cause, and Balian's army had marched through the night, hidden in nearby hills. At the signal, the turncoats within Laeren assaulted the keep from within, opening the gates for Balian and his army. What followed was the slaughter of not just the armies of the Vexland cause, but the entire Vexland family, and the families of many of those who supported him. In one swoop, Balian annihilated all opposition to his rule, before burning Laeren so that it became a smoking ruin to warn other rebellious subjects. He entered Morvaid city 2 weeks later, to a hero's welcome, and was crowned by Liomedion IV as the Kale of Morvaid, the first of the ruling house of Calvain. So, the Calvains aren't actually the true Kales of this land, they're actually the that cadet branch who rose to power after the original Vane line vanished. Well, it didn't vanish, it died slowly but steadily. The lands of Morvaid are ruled from Morvaid City, which is a huge medieval metropolis of around just over 1 million people, and it's ruled from the Falcon Spire, which is a great citadel right in the centre of the city. But from now on, we'll move from there. That's Morvaid, and again they hold imperial designs on all of on Kaledanian. They want all of it because they see it as their birthright, and they might be correct. We'll move on next to the Great Kaledom of Cainmar, which, if you see, is in the bottom left of the map there of Kaledanian. And if you can see that that's near to the Lost Continent, then you'd be right, because the Kales of Cainmar have great ties with the raiders of the southern Lost Continent. In fact, the settlers from the Lost Continent were the ones who started settling Cainmar back in the day. So after the 11-year birth, it again lived in peace for quite a long time. That is until the time of Daga Forgebreaker. Because Daga Forgebreaker is actually probably, if I'm being honest, the most famous of the Cainmarian Kales. the Kales of Cainmar. He is, well, was a peerless warrior and a great diplomat, but in the 6th century, since oh, hang on a second. Yeah. What am I talking about here? Okay. So, at this time, like, Cainmar is its own thing after the Silken Bandage is signed in the year 2000. So, the year 2000, the Silken Bandage is signed, and Cainmar is brought into being. Cainmar in the old tongue, Cain means vigilant, and Mar means guardian. So, yeah, obviously the name means vigilant guardian, which shows their ties to the older gods and things like that. So in the 6th century, since the Silken Bandage was signed in 2000, the fleets of Cainmar have only been called into basically all-out war on one occasion, and that's with the arrival of something called the Bloodstar Company. The Bloodstar Company were led by a man known as Pelagon, who it was claimed was a descendant of Sarpedon. After fighting for years in the steaming seas, in the sleet seas, he'd returned to conquer basically Kaledanian in the name of his forebear, and he wanted to start with Cainmar. But to break Kaledanian, he would need to get past the Cainmarian war fleet, however, and this would be no easy feat, as the people of Cainmar had basically evolved from humble beginnings to basically be expert sailors. The land of Cainmar is harsh, very harsh. It's basically a tundra land with not very much growing on it, and so the people of Cainmar basically rely on fish, they rely on sea trade, and so the Cainmarian war fleet is essentially like one of the biggest in the world. It's pretty unstoppable, but the Bloodstar Company took it on anyway. So it's just how things work out in history, where you have different scions of different lines that come in together and try to take different parts of the world from each other. So let me just switch this on for a minute. There we go. Yeah, so for the Bloodstar Company to take over Kaledanian, they had to get past the Cainmarian war fleet. The grandson of Raga Kal, who was the first Kale of Cainmar, Daga, had recently come to the throne, and his first challenge was 1,000 black holes off his coast with a single blood crimson star on their sails. For 9 years, the breaking seas were churned red, as Daga led his fleets to repel invasion after invasion. He could not be everywhere at once, however, and in the south of his realm, the Bloodstar Company made landfall, with Pelagon himself tearing through the country, heading straight for the Cainmarian capital of Calvallen, which is the City of Change, which is the Cainmarian, as I said, the Cainmarian capital. So if you see there, the breaking seas on the left-hand side, you can see where this guy's come from, Pelagon. He's come from the west to take over Kaledanian on his own with the Bloodstar Company, but he's got to take on Cainmar first, he feels. Daga met Pelagon at a place called the Churned Ford in the 2094th year of the Shattered Age. So 94 years this is after the signing of the Silken Bandage, and he defeated him in battle at the battle of the same name. Daga led the Cainmarians from the front, wielding the jaw of Raga, his grandfather's axe. The Cainmarian heavy infantry tore through the expert spearmen of the Bloodstar Company and sent their leader back into the sea. The Bloodstar Wars would drag on for another 5 years, however, as Bloodstar forces fought a guerrilla war within the Cainmarian lands. 4 of Daga's 5 sons were killed during this time, and the Kale were said to be consumed with grief. He ventured into the breaking seas with only 50 ships in the 2019-90 year of the Shattered Age, in a bid to pull Pelagon out to face him. The gambit paid off, however, and his men were surrounded and severely outnumbered. It was said that the Battle of the Crimson Strait, the Kale held out for 6 hours like this before his flanking force arrived to smash the Bloodstar fleet. Dager is said to have cut down Pelagon himself, decapitating him and hurling his body into the churning crimson mush that was the Kaimarian Strait. It's not on this map, the Kaimarian Strait, but it is there. I just haven't put it in. But I will do in future maps. So, for the next 9 years, Dager would disappear from history. Most reports indicate that as a penance for every year of the war, he could not destroy Pelagon. He climbed the slopes of Mount Skyreach, which is also not on the map, but it will be, the largest mountain in Kaledanian, alone. Once upon the slopes, he met the Ragged Folk, who were said to speak to the dead gods of the summit. They guided the Kale through many dead falls and rock slides before coming to the High Heart near its summit. Dager discovered there a metal unlike any other. A pure vein of meteor struck Feyerite, glistening blackly at the centre of a small chamber. He laid down his burdens and learnt at the feet of the Ragged Folk, as they set about teaching him how to work miracles out of the stone. And for the next 9 years, the Kale of Kaimar hammered away at the High Heart's great forge, perfecting his art. He created 9 weapons of incredible power, mostly blades, from the fires of the High Heart as his penance for failing to end the conflict with the Bloodstar Company sooner, and upon leaving shattered the inner walls of the High Heart, so the Feyerite caved in upon itself with his hammer Godbreaker. Only one with the strength to truly use one of his weapons would be able to open the way again to the forge. From this moment, he would be forever known as Dager Forgebreaker. So I'm gonna leave them there, because the Kaimarian people, they are essentially part of, they're an offshoot of the Lost Continent. So they are adept at making vast fleet. They are adept at being expert seamen. But the other thing that I'd like to say is, yes, they are based on the Norse. They are based on Norse Vikings. The people of the Lost Continent are the actual Vikings. These are the actual Norsemen, the actual raiders. Whereas Kaimar itself is actually akin to sort of medieval Denmark, if it was allowed to get rid of Christianity, basically. Yeah, so that's that. Since then, they've basically lived in peace, the people of Kaimar. They've fought many mercenary wars. They have great mercenary fleets. But the actual country of Kaimar itself has stayed relatively peaceful since that time. As I said before, a lot of the culture of Kaimar is very runic. So there are long halls, there are runes carved on wood. Everything that you would associate with a Viking metropolis is what Kalevalin is. And Kalevalin is called the City of Change because its actual harbour can be shorn off with chains. That's how adept the Kaimarians are at cutting off and fighting on the sea. They are also expert shock troopers. They're absolutely fantastic shock troopers. They don't wear much armour as what you're seeing in the picture in front of you right now. The Kaimarian armour is basically Norse armour. It's basically tight-fitting but light, and many Kaimarian soldiers use two-handed axes or an axe in both hands. They very rarely use shields. They're not very disciplined, but they're very good at what they do, and that's breaking the enemy. So that's Kaimar. So now we'll move on to I think we'll move on to Raidmere next. Yeah, we'll move on to Raidmere next. Raidmere is in the top left there, as you can see, and it is on vast fertile plains but these aren't really plains that can support massive amounts of crops. You know, the soil isn't very deep here. It's quite a rocky place in places, and so it's not a very good place for humans. It's a fantastic place though for horses, and I'll get into them in a second once I've had a drink. So, Raidmere essentially is the home of the knights. There are knights all over the place in Kaledanian, and knights are obviously a part of the Spire Church. You know, they weren't a part of the old clans, but they were brought here from Valenreath. They are a Valenreathian invention. And in Raidmere they have perfected the art of cavalry warfare to a T. And when I say a T, these guys are obsessed horsemen. They live in the saddle. They are essentially European Mongols, European Mongolians. You know, they're deadly from the saddle. They don't really use infantry. Most of their cities are... They only really have one big one. They only really have one major city. And the rest of them are just small townships where they look after horses and they breed horses. It is in fertile plains, so it's very warm in Raidmere. And yeah, the actual city of Talingard, which is the capital city of Raidmere, is in the centre of a forest. Quite a large forest, a huge forest actually. And it has about 100,000 to 200,000 people within it. So it's not a small city, but it's no Morvaid city. So, where are we going with the people of... Okay. So, again, they were born from the strife of the 11-year birth, and yeah, Raidmere was born from the strife of the 11-year birth, like its sister Kaeldam's. It has always been, however, a land of independence. Even the power of the Kael only counts for so much in Raidmere. The old clans of Raidmere Reach were clans in the truest sense of the word. The plains of Raidmere are not overly warm like Morvaid, or hammered by stone like the ranges of Cainmar. They are vast, wide open areas with tiny streams dotting them. In short, horses bred here to such an extent that some speculate that they outnumbered the folk who settled here. So there are so many horses in Raidmere that they could actually outnumber wild horses. That they could actually outnumber the people who live there. Sorry. The original settlers of Raidmere, like all humans, came from the Reef continent, thousands upon thousands of years before it ever gave birth to an empire. Over the time, the shard folk of the Lost Continent would travel to Raidmere to trade of its horses, with many settling its coastline to administer the trade of fish, furs, and other wares. So, it was the family of Raid and its most famous patriarch, Gadon. He is known in the south as the Horse Lord, who threw away the original name of his family to rename them after the very plains upon which his people fought in the 11-year birth, and even before this. This sent a clear message to the rest of his vassals, and for 20 years Gadon Raid fought a war of conquest of tribe after tribe felt... I'm sorry, I've mixed this up. Forget what I've just said. Gadon Raid was actually the first main ruler of Raidmere. You know, he conquered the rest of the old clans of the area into his actual fledgling Kaeldom, even though it wasn't a Kaeldom back then. In fact, that's one of the only instances of the old clans going to war that we actually have, when they're not fighting the First Empire, when they're fighting amongst themselves. But this period of glorious consolidation would come to a screeching end with the coming of the First Empire, as its conquest of the continent ground the armies of all peoples of Kaledanian into the dust. The people of Radomir could simply find no answer to the unstoppable bulwark that was the Silver Legion. It was simply too disciplined to break due to a cavalry charge, and no matter how many horses the Radomirians could field, the Silver Legion could muster 5 times their numbers in men alone. Rather than surrender, after the disastrous end of the Kaledanian resistance, the clans of Radomir, led by Gadon, embarked on a guerrilla war from the Crowning Wood in the northern reaches of their plains, moving from there into the mountains through secret tunnels, and then through there the other would-be Kaledams, appearing from seemingly nowhere to strike at First Empire forces from all sides. Gadon was killed in this conflict. However, the struggle of his people went on until they were eventually smashed. Eventually smashed. They were eventually smashed when his descendant, Heradan Raid, grew overconfident and met the Silver Legion in open conflict at the Battle of the Main in the 1262nd year of the Age of Valen. Here, 120,000 horsemen, yes, you heard correctly, of Radomir fought against the amassed power of the Silver Legion in Kaledanian, some 85,000 men, and were slaughtered almost to a horse and man. The last resistance of the old clans was over, almost 700 years after the old clans had originally capitulated, a testament to the tenaciousness of the Radomirians. So there we go. That's not 700 years, because the First Empire didn't rule them 700... No, never mind. It was the young son of Gadon Raid, Rendon, who led the Radomirians first against the First Empire when it finally fell. So this is another Gadon Raid, a later Gadon Raid, whose son Rendon leads them against the First Empire when it finally falls, uniting the other Dragon Kills to smash the Empire at the Battle of Oakvale. He fought through the 11-year birth, and after this was named the first Kael of Radomir at the signing of the Silken Bandage. He made his capital at Talingard, the seat of his family. The raids, however, the seat of his family, the raids. However, it was just 4 years before the fierce independence of the Radomirians presented itself to be their greatest strength and weakness once more. In the year 2004 of the Shattered Age, that saw the families of Harkon and Hailborn to unite their supporting clans and to attempt to remove Rendon from the throne. He fought for 6 years against this threat, bathing the plains of his land in yet more blood when it could ill afford to be so weak. In the end, he outmaneuvered his enemies, surrounding their fortress at Hakengard and annihilating it utterly with his loyal forces. The Civil War was known as the Riders' Fall, and completely annihilated the aggression and fertility, the aggregation and fertility of the soil of Radomir for a generation, thanks to the sheer amount of horses hammering the fertile ground. As such, Rendon looked to the other Kaels for support in feeding his people. He found none, however. Dismayed, the Kael travelled to the east, looking for allies, and finally found, in the year 2015 of the Shattered Age, he came to Gensen, and there he met with the ruling Crown Prince, Shiro. The two spent much time in each other's company, and eventually signed a treaty that saw Gensen trading rice and wheat to Radomir for fine horses, cedar timber, and other luxuries. With the profits from this venture, Rendon purchased vast estates in Gensen, founding the Broken Lancers Mercenary Company in 2020 to act as a security force for his extensive lands there. The Broken Lancers were going to hire themselves out to any willing to pay in the years following Gensen's fall to the Asunder. So, the Kaels of Radomir go on to fight extensively in the last Moon Wars, which is basically the wars of the Asunder, who we'll be seeing a lot of in the campaign. The Asunder basically came south and started trying to conquer Gensen, and because Radomir had such extensive holdings there, many of their young sons went over there to fight. The year... Ow. Sorry. Okay. The year 2567 of the Shattered Age brought a tide from the northern reaches of the world. Without any warning, a vast swathe of warriors descended on the northern coast of Gensen from their gargantuan warships with billowing orange and black sails. They had come from the unknown and sun-blasted northern continent, and swept across the Brimstone Ocean to challenge the empires of the east. The Kael of Raidmere at this time, Riordan Raid, sailed for the east with his sons to combat the threat and to protect Raidmerian interests within Gensen, and for 23 years the battles would rage across the continent. The invaders, known as the Asunder, however, seemed unending in number and finally pushed Riordan and Crown Prince Hero to the capital city of Gensen, Kairu. Riordan had already lost his sons over the course of the 20-plus year bloodbath, one Kelban at the Battle of the Lotus in 2572, and another, Buridan, in in 2583 at the Battle of the Leaves, which sparked the real end of the war. The latter battle, fought between 120,000 troops of Gensen and Raidmere, against nearly twice that number of Asunder troops. Sorry, let me just take another swig of my drink. The defenders blocking the path to Kairu at this battle were annihilated on the field after fighting bravely and costing the Asunder many warriors. However, the Asunder rolled on and laid siege to Kairu for a further 16 years. I'm actually losing my voice a little bit here. Well, I'll carry on. That should be okay. So, they laid siege to Kairu for 16 years, the Asunder. The city starved over this period, and the weak, old, and extremely young died quickly. The rest were left to linger, and barely looked human when Riordan made his last decision. Refusing to die, cornered like an animal, he dismissed his men, smuggling many of them out of the city with the broken lances, who had strict orders by Riordan to switch sides and save themselves. This remains the only occasion in history that they have done so. Riordan marched from the city, alone, emaciated and weak, and challenged the leader of the Asunder, the great Akiera Akerod, to a duel to the death. We'll be hearing a lot more about Akiera Akerod as we go on in our guide. Akiera was a warrior of peerless renown, and he did Riordan great honour in granting the request. Against all odds, the Kael of Raidmere came very close to ending the life of the Asunder conqueror, but was finally killed with a single blow to the throat. Akiera burned the body of Riordan with full honours, and returned his ashes to his men in the broken lances before turning to the city of Kairu and declaring it a habitation fit now only for cowards. He ordered that everything within the city limits was to be slaughtered. Above the city, as the massacre proceeded, a visage in the sky happened. A binding image, it seemed, of horsemen galloping across the air. But we'll get to that a bit later on. Okay. Where are we now? It seemed for many months that the line of the raids had ended, and the clans of Raidmere were circling each other like starved wolves once again. This was until the return of the 15-year-old Kelban, bastard son of Buridan Raid by a princess of Gensen. He came with a letter of legitimacy signed by the former Kael Riordan, and was escorted into Talingard by the Broken Lancers themselves. To an astonished and grateful court, he was proclaimed Kael of Raidmere in 2604 of the Shattered Age, and took the second name Raidmane, which means Raid of the East. He died of the Bloody Flux after ruling peacefully for 35 years, and his son Cade I, Raidmane, has the ghosts of a dynasty upon his shoulders as he sits the Ember Birch throne, which is the throne of Raidmere. So, as you can see, a very brave and warlike people are the people of Raidmere, expert horsemen as they are. So we'll now move on to the last, thank God, of the Kael'dims, which is Kea Vale. Now, Kea Vale, as you can see on the map, is in the south east, and it is the largest of the Kael'doms. But it's not the most fertile, but it is the largest, and it incorporates very distinct vales, grasslands that are permeated by rivers, separated by rivers, separated by small mountain ranges and hills into separate vales, and each of the lords of Kea Vale owns one of these vales, basically. Like all of the others, it comes from the Silken Bandage. It comes from the Silken Bandage. Kea Vale lies to the east of Cainmar, over the mountains of Creed. Sorry, I've got hiccups. Give me 1 second. Okay, back, sorry about that. So, Kea Vale lies to the east of Cainmar, over the mountains of Creed. It encompasses great fertile plains, known as the Vales, which are fed by winding shallow rivers. The farmland of Kea Vale makes it one of the most prolific farming centres of Saga, coming second only to the vast complexes of Menshai and the sheer size of Valenreath, and of course Morvaid itself. Ruled by the family of Kea, this Kaeldom is famous for producing master tacticians and swordsmen. The old clan of Kea ruled the largest vale within the land, that is now known as Kea Vale. They called it Taeanfang, or Earth Spring in the common tongue. The Kea family, like the other families, has a mythic past that is largely forgotten. But what is clear is that the old clan climbed to the summit of power and influence by proving their strength against their rivals, much like the raids of Raidmere did. When the First Empire came to Kaledanian, it was the old clan of Kea that orchestrated the defence of the continent, and when Sarpedon began to train his own armies in preparation for rebellion, it was to the Kea family that he turned for trusted lieutenants. One of these generals was the matriarch of the family at the time, Seren Kea. Not the one who would fight centuries later, incidentally. This is the original Seren Kea. So she isn't the original... no, she's the original. She isn't the later one, who in the end throws off the yoke of the First Empire. So... who would go on to preside? Seren Kea would go on to preside over countless victories over the First Empire, as well as in the east, Sarpedon's side. The proximity to Sarpedon's legacy means that the family of Kea is a credible threat to any who would have imperialistic intentions upon Kaledanian. The line of Kea actually could even, by legitimacy, have claims on the line of Valenrethian emperors, because Seren Kea and her offspring are tied to Sarpedon. Because Seren Kea did have children with Sarpedon. The capital of Kea Vale sits within Taeanfang and is known as Valefast. It straddles the forking river Fang and stretches out across the central plain of the Kaeldom. At one end sits the fortress of Kael's Watch, that, as the name suggests, looks over the city from the Great Central Hill. It is an imposing sight, wrapped in stone with blue-green domes dotted about its battlements. Trees are abundant in Valefast and are fed by irrigation provided by the fast-flowing river Fang. Trading cogs make their way up and down the river constantly. and the surrounding countryside is ripe year-round in mild times. There are more training schools for warriors in Valefast than there are granaries, however, and each district provides its own combat team to the central entertainment complex of the veranda to showcase their skills in times of peace. So, the men and women of this Kaledom value the sword above all things and are known to be prolific in its use. Even the common people of Caer Vale are more than capable of using a blade, something unheard of in other regions of the world. The climate of Caer Vale is often rain-sodden but warm, perfect conditions within which to grow crops, and the fields of the Vales are swollen with fruit, wheat, rice, paddies and grain stores. Each Vale within Caer Vale has its own capital and lord, which is unusual for a Kaledom, as powers such as this only regularly have 4 lords at any one time. Caer Vale, however, holds the old ways of the old clans, as well as the old code. The people of Caer Vale have always been farmers who guarded their own lands, and as much as the old code is well suited to keeping those lands safe. The old ways, however, refers to the trappings of the old clans that many of the new Kaledoms have abandoned. There is a marked difference between a king and a Kale. At least there is supposed to be. The 12 lords in Caer Vale form the Emerald Council, who advise the current Kale and his family in peace and war. When a Kale dies, however, a blood rite, as I mentioned before, or Kale Tame, as it's known, is held. Kale Tame meaning choosing, and the lords gather to elect a new Kale. The family of the dead Kale may put forward their own candidate to become Kale. If another lord disagrees, he may put himself forward as the Kale. If this happens, the claimant must fight in single combat to the death against a champion of the ruling family's choosing, or the claimant himself. This may or not be the heir apparent, and this is called the Kale's advantage, as I mentioned before. In the days of the old clans, gatherings such as this were common. However, after the signing of the Silken Bandage, there has not been one lord to come forward and challenge Caer rule, or any Kale in that fact. The only one to do so was long after was in Morvaid, as we discussed earlier. Upon the collapse of the First Empire, the Caer family joined its forces, and by extension, Caer Vales, with the Cal family of Cainmar in open rebellion. The Vanes and Raid Mains, or just raids as they were back then, were to join the uprising at a later date, but for months, Seren Caer fought for the memory of her grandmother, also called Seren Caer, and her grandfather, the first Seren, and of course Sarpedon, and led the Caervalians against the First Empire, whilst Raga Cal kept the great power at bay on the breaking seas. The armies that did land upon Kaledanian were vast compared to the bands of warriors that she commanded. She harried the Silver Legion constantly, however, picking it apart piece by piece, using her general Roban Cadethorn to lead commando units to their camps and burn them as they slept. Eventually, as she met with more and more success, the Vanes and raids joined the rebellion in the north and south of Kaledanian, and at the Battle of Vigil Vale, as we discussed earlier in the last part, in the year 1989 of the Age of Valen, the Dragon Kales, as they were known at the time, annihilated the forces of the First Empire, shattering its hold upon the continent. Seren Caer, however, did not survive the battle for long, dying of her wounds as all she had fought for was torn apart by the Dragon Kales in the 11 years of civil war known as the 11-year birth. Her son Royce was to lead the Caervalians in the 11-year birth, and won many victories when armies threatened the Vales. He never ventured outside of his Kaeldom's borders, however, and was united in the mindset of Raga Cal that the war was futile. Upon the signing of the Silken Bandage, Royce Caer, great-grandson of Sarpedon, became the first Kale of Caer Vale, and established the dynasty of his family to rule over the Vales that had been entrusted to them. Now, from here on in, from nearly a century, well, technically a century, the Great Kaledom of Caer Vale exists in peace. Like, it doesn't really have much going on. But if we look at the map here, you can see the lost continent down there. The lost continent is disappearing down south and will become uninhabitable very soon. What you can see there is the habitable land on the lost continent. Not very much, as you can see. And one main invasion happened of Kaledanian by the people of Shardland in the south, the lost continent, and it was called the Dance of the Shard Kings. Give me 1 second. Okay. The time of testing for this new dynasty of Royces came in the 2088th year of the Shattered Age. In the reign of Royce's grandson, Graydon Kea, known to history as Graydon Firemane, in the south of Saga lies the lost continent upon which sits a loose conglomeration of kingdoms known as the Empire of Shards. The Shard folk are experts at eking out life upon vast tracts of freezing wasteland, and their northern kingdoms of Canaan and Fenmar make a life raiding the sleet seas and its trading lanes. For centuries, the men and women of the lost continent endured against the great enemy of winter, whilst the First Empire rose and fell. In 2080 of the Shattered Age, however, the two northernmost kings, Varan Six Crows and Rudagond Cauldron Hammer, declared an alliance and conquered the immediate kingdoms around them. This act, however, was at risk. A risk, as infighting in civil war is strictly forbidden within the Empire of Shards. Life is too precious here to be thrown away in war. The kingdoms of Canaan and Thainmar, then, facing the wrath of the Shard Lord, the Emperor of the Empire of Shards, looked north across the seas for conquest. They assembled a massive war fleet and set sail for southern Kaledanian and landed in the 2088th year of the Shattered Age, easily overpowering the southern Vales that were a part of the Kaledom of Kea Vale. Sorry. Okay. For the next 8 years, the Shard Kings of Varan and Rudagon conquered all before them, overwhelming the army sent against them with such numbers as to make tactical decisions impossible to make for the armies of Kea Vale. Graydon Kea had only recently come to the throne in Balefast, and had been fighting a defensive war since the invasion being outnumbered some 5 to 1. Territory was sacrificed just to slow down the war machine that was the Shard folk invasion, as more and more people from across the Sleet Seas migrated in droves to settle the lands conquered by their kings. As you can see on this map. So the Lost Continent people are now trying to conquer Kea Vale. The Shard folk invasion was... oh yeah. Graydon, however, would not give in. At the Battle of Hemlock's Ford, in the year 2093 of the Shattered Age, he led a Shard folk army, 3 times his size, into the marshes of the ford, where, surrounding the assailing force and cutting them to pieces. This halted all Shard King immediate thoughts of taking Balefast, and ensured their expansion was halted at least for a year. The year 2094 saw Graydon adopt a crimson-red cloak, an unusual colour for the Kea Vale. He named it the Firemane, and said that a Kea Vale would wear it during times of war when his land needed him most. The Kael raced from corner to corner of his Kaeldom, shoring up defences, and upon meeting Daga Forgebreaker, who was alive at this time, to discuss an alliance against invasions of Kaledanian, he was gifted the Feyerite sword Shardbane. This is a confusion in dates, however, as Daga did not actually make his 9 weapons in the High Heart until some years later. It is believed that Daga beseeched the Ragged folk to construct a Godbreaker his own weapon, and Shardbane before going on to forge his own. Graydon fought to turn the tide in the years following the Battle of Hemlock's Ford. He struck at the new territory of the Shard Kings again and again, using his superior knowledge of the land to strip away the numbers of the vast Shard folk hosts arrayed against him, and for a time it seemed as if he would turn the tide. At the Battle of Tales Forest, in the 2095th year of the Shattered Age, Graydon again smashed the forces of the Shard folk and crippled the invasion of Rudigon Cauldronhammer, wounding him in the process. Rudigon fled to the coast, and then on to his fellow Shard King's lands to recover his strength and await reinforcements. 1 second. Don't itch my eye there for a second. What you're seeing in front of you, the picture here, is actually Veilfast. It's much bigger than this, but that's the best picture of a lovely watery city that I could find. The true turning point of this conflict came in the year 2096, a year later, when Varen and Rudigon parlayed at a fortress known as the Spirehold that was sequestered down the Kaledanian coast towards Raidmere. Towards Cainmar, sorry. During a night, Varen Six Crows, the other Shard King, who led the invasion, made a fateful decision. He and his armies turned on the beleaguered forces of Rudigon, trapping them within the fortress and slaughtering them. Rudigon, however, would not die so easily, and held Varen's forces off long enough for his own troops to arrive. Rather than let their invading armies tear each other apart, however, wisely, and on the news that Graydon Kera had heard of the civil conflict and was on the march to expel them from his lands, the two Shard Kings decided to settle matters in the old way. They duelled to the death in the courtyard of Spirehold in a battle that is still legendary within the Shard folk to this day. It was a duel in which Varen won the day. The invasion was now to be led, and was now his to lead. He consolidated his fortress and marched north to meet the Kael of Kaer to decide the fate of the entire Kaeldom. The two armies met at a bank of the River Fang, at what is now the central Taenfang Basin. The Battle of Taenfang, in 2099 of the Shattered Age, pitted 120,000 Shard folk against 50,000 Kaevalian troops. The armies of Graydon Kea stood at the only approach to the centre of Kaer Vale. If Varen was to take Veilfast, he would have to smash through the army that stood in front of him. The conflict lasted throughout the day, with both sides hammering at each other on the plain. Graydon kept his forces anchored against one bank of the river to protect his flank, whilst his cavalry tore shreds out of the Shard folk flank on the other side. The Shard King's armies were shredded by this tactic until both Varen and Graydon came upon each other in the centre of the fray, with the odds of victory still in the balance. Their armies parted around them to allow them room, and weave blade to weave blade, which is a sword made of Feyerite, the two men fought to decide the fate of Kaer Vale. The speed with which they fought is said to have been to such an extent that many watching swear they did not see many of the cuts and strokes the combatants were making. In the end, Varen may have already been carrying a wound from his previous duel, but Graydon impaled his body upon Shardbane, finishing him with a clean cut across the throat. The Shard folk armies fought for a time, but were rudderless from this point on. Their numbers wilted against the discipline of the Kaevalian troops, and as night fell, they were routed from the field, and killed. So, the war known as the Dance of the Shard Kings was over. However, many hundreds of thousands of men, women and children were still settled on the lower parts of Kaer Vale, who had followed their conquering kings. Rather than give in to yet more bloodshed, Graydon signed the Free Canaan Pact with their leaders, meaning they would have their own lands in the south of Kaledanian, but they would be vassals and subjects to the Kaer Vale. To this day, they provide the Great Kaeldom of Kaer Vale with a navy that is a match for anything aside from that found in Cainmar. And the Free Canaan duchies remain free in nothing but their name. The Dance of the Shard Kings saw the only full-scale invasion of Kaledanian since the coming of the First Empire, with the incursion of the Bloodstar Company being only a raid by comparison. It took many decades for Caer Vale to recover much of its strength. However, the land still bears the scars of this conflict. The Kales of Caer Vale still look across the south, the sleet seas in the south, with barely contained disdain and trepidation. Sorry. There is a lot more lore about Caer Vale, because it is the first Caeldom actually made. But I'm simply going to skip over most of it now, because this video is getting very long. Needless to say, the people of Caer Vale are the expert swordsmen of Kaledanian, and they even have a sect called the Exiles. The Exiles are basically some of the greatest swordsmen the world's ever seen, and they have a way of teaching called the Scabbard. And the Scabbard is basically an ever-evolving fighting style, the Exiles use a sword called the Branch, which is an oak branch fashioned in the shape of a sword with a lead core, which is many times heavier than an actual sword. They always carry their sword hand in a sling, and only ever really take it out in private to exercise and train, or in a duel to the death. Those are the only times they ever take their sword hand out from the sling. Otherwise, they'll use their weaker hand to fight an enemy. Mainly they'll fight using the Branch, and they'll travel all over the world taking on anyone in a duel to the first touch or the first wound, using the Branch. However, they only really unsheath their Life Ward, which is their sword of office, in a duel to the death or in a serious duel, where they will, that rule's been relaxed as time's gone on. So sometimes they do use both hands, even if it's not a duel to the death. If it's a serious duel where their honour's at stake, they'll use both hands, that sort of thing. But they are exclusively from Caer Vale. At least they were for a long time. And that is the symbol of the martial prowess that Caer Vale holds dear, the art of the swordsman and the tactical awareness of the battlefield. That's basically what Caer Vale's all about. So that is basically all of the great Caeldoms of Caer Vale covered. This will be the longest video that we've done by a long way. Thanks for sticking with it if you have till the end. And yeah, this is essentially the most European of the powers of Saga, the most recognisable. All the pictures you've seen are of castles that I believe are in Kaledanian, that I've taken from the internet, that really do describe, that basically, are castles that I've described in my work, basically. So I've taken the picture and gone, oh, that looks cool. I'll bring that into Kaledanian, and I'll make it, a castle that's actually got some lore around it. So you've been watching Kaledanian for the past hour or so. So as you can see, it's a lot different to the west. It's a lot more European. It's a lot more crenellated. There's a lot more, about knights and chivalry and all of that fun stuff. So we will get to knights, by the way. We will get to things like the old code of knights and knightly orders and how they all work. And we will also get to the Great Ladder as well, which is basically barons, dukes, lords, and Kales or kings. So you can see the ladder of nobility. So I'm not just pulling these things out of my arse. They all have lore attached to them. When I say lord, I don't just mean random lord. It's a lord with a capital L, because it's in the law, a lord is actually one of the advisors to the king, and it's the highest rung on the noble ladder, the Great Ladder, that you can get to without actually being a king, a Kale, or an emperor yourself. So we will get to that in a later video, probably once we've done all of the powers. Next will be Menshai and Gensen. I think it's more important to discuss them, since they will be featuring prominently in our campaign. Thanks for watching. Happy rolling, and I'll see you guys later.